Welcome to 1984 Lore, and today I cover the named characters of the novel, explaining who each are and what they're doing. We shall descend in significance, beginning of course with the main characters and finishing with the more obscure ones. Since I am covering only named individuals, I may overlook other memorable minor characters, which I'm sure will be covered in some form in another video. As you can see, I've provided timestamps for those interested in skipping to particular individuals. This is also available in the description and pinned comments section. Spoilers are obviously imminent, so if you've never read the book, I strongly encourage you to do so before continuing, as you're missing out on a great experience. Finally, if I've missed anybody, then apologies in advance. So, let's begin. Winston Smith is the 39-year-old protagonist of the story and begins the book by opening a diary. Winston is an everyman character intended to be our eyes and ears into the world of Oceania. He is a lean, fair-faced, rather intellectual and brooding type of man who works in the Ministry of Truth, one of the 4 ministries of Oceania. His job is specifically in the records department as a clerk who rectifies or changes public records to accord with the current party truth. Though on the surface Winston plays the part of a dutiful party member and worker, he secretly hates both the party and Big Brother and seeks to explore the real past beyond the party history. He is fascinated with the abolished past and eventually moves from thought crime alone and writing in his diary to conducting an affair with fellow party member Julia. He and Julia carry on their secret and forbidden love affair, seemingly under the nose of the Fort Police, and after Winston is one day approached by O'Brien, he eventually meets with him, accompanied by Julia in his flat. This is seemingly to join the so-called Brotherhood, a shadowy opposition group led by Emmanuel Goldstein, that seeks to bring down the party. Alas, both Winston and Julia are eventually caught and arrested, but not before Winston has much of his suspicions concerning the mechanisms of party control confirmed in Goldstein's book. Winston is tortured by O'Brien and the Fort Police in the Ministry of Love, eventually warped into loving and not hating Big Brother. In the process, he is also broken completely in room 101, where he is forced to face the most terrible thing in the world, for him, rats. Here his love for Julia is also forever severed. Winston finally ends the novel a broken and hollowed out man. Nothing of his former self remains, and he is a loyal party member who loves Big Brother. Julia is another of the main 3 characters of the book and is the lover of Winston Smith. She is 26 years old and works as a mechanic on the novel writing machines in the fiction department of the Ministry of Truth. At first, Winston hates her, though is somewhat attracted to her, given she appears the sort of fanatical younger party member who would gladly turn him in to the Fort Police. Julia is superficially a model party member. She is a member of the Junior Anti-Sex League, a group who advocates for complete and universal celibacy for all party members. She conspicuously wears the scarlet sash of the League around her waist. Julia works long hours and works even more hours in her free time to help disseminate Junior Anti-Sex League posters and propaganda. One day she stages a fall near Winston and smuggles him a note that reads, "I love you." From this initial contact, a full-blown love affair ensues, revealing Julia to be anything but a good party member. Julia has had other lovers, her first affair being at age 16 with a party member of 60. Julia is politically apathetic, initially refusing to believe that the Brotherhood exists, and even questioning if the war itself is real. She defies the party for her own secret life and pleasure, not for political purposes or to overthrow it, which she sees as rather silly. She develops a mutual love for Winston as their affair progresses. Unfortunately for her, her latest affair would prove her undoing, as she is arrested along with Winston and taken to the Ministry of Love. She too emerges from her experience there as a broken woman, her love for Winston permanently destroyed. Though Julia is politically uninterested, falling to sleep invariably when Winston insists on talking about politics or ideology, she was, however, capable of great insight and intelligence when it came to her own life and sexuality, hence Winston's sarcastic nickname for her, the Rebel from the waist down. Julia's surname is never revealed to us. O'Brien is the third and final main character of the novel, and later revealed to be the main antagonist. He spends most of the novel as a mysterious and magnetic character, a focus of Winston's hopes and fantasies about a secret group dedicated to the overthrow of Big Brother and the party. O'Brien is a few years older than Winston, though his exact age is never stated, and he is a member of the Inner Party. This makes him part of the elite, the rulers of Oceania, and so a person Winston should naturally fear. O'Brien, however, has a curious way about him, a noble bearing that contrasts with his impressive physicality. He also seems to Winston like he could be a secret thought criminal too. Eventually, in the second part of the novel, O'Brien approaches Winston with the excuse of offering him a look at the latest Newspeak dictionary, and the two, along with Julia, meet in his home. Here, all of Winston's secret hopes are apparently confirmed. O'Brien inducts him and Julia into the Brotherhood and arranges for Smith to receive a copy of Goldstein's book, which explains why their world is the way it is. O'Brien, however, is later revealed to be a double agent, totally loyal to both the party and Big Brother. He personally oversees Winston's interrogation in the Ministry of Love, helping to intellectually and emotionally break down Winston, so that by the time the latter is confronted with Room 101, he succeeds in severing Winston's love for Julia and in forcing Winston to eventually and willingly love and not hate Big Brother. O'Brien's first name is never revealed in the book, though it may indicate he is of Irish extraction, though this is not relevant to the plot. O'Brien has a larger-than-life bearing and a certain charisma that attracts those around him, with even Julia seemingly impressed in their meeting. He is also distinguished for his great intellect and steely commitment to the principles of Ingsoc. Now we move on to the minor characters of the book, both existent and non-existent, though the latter, apart from one named character, is still arguable, as we shall see. Big Brother is the supposed ruler of Oceania and leader of the party, one of the three characters that fall into the non-existent category. His non-existence is the closest to certain, given Goldstein's book, which Winston reads parts of later in the story, states that Big Brother is simply the guise in which the party wishes to present itself. The book further states that no one has ever seen him in person, that his general location is never known, and that he will likely never die, all of which indicates he is merely a fictitious symbol of the party. Big Brother, who is never given an actual name, is a voice on the telescreens and a face on posters and every other media, even on the currency. Though quite likely more an Uncle Sam or Britannia type figure, his existence is taken as a given by all right-thinkful party members. According to the official history of the party, he has been active for years, stretching back into the decades before the party achieved power, though Winston does not recall Big Brother before other prominent party members like Jones, Aaronson, and Rutherford. Big Brother consolidated his power as leader of the party and state by about 1970, Jones, Aaronson and Rutherford being among the final leaders of the party who were purged to make way for his supposed supreme leadership. Big Brother appears as a ruggedly handsome and mustachioed man in about his middle 40s. He never appears personally at any point in the novel. Emmanuel Goldstein, in contrast to Big Brother, is the arch-traitor and devil-like figure of hatred and ridicule in Oceania. He is the evil mirror to Big Brother. Whereas the former is the source of all wisdom, safety and goodness, Goldstein leads a shadowy resistance to the party, plotting with his foreign allies to bring down the party and Big Brother. Goldstein is famously always the principal subject and speaker during the daily 2 minutes hate. Similar to Big Brother, there is a strong likelihood that he does not, in fact, exist, but is merely a fabrication, intended to be a target for the pent-up hatred and anger of the oppressed outer party and masses. According to official party history, Goldstein had once been a loyal member of the party, almost at a level with Big Brother himself, but had then betrayed BB and the revolution. He had fled before the great purges of the 1960s, the story going that he now plots the downfall of the party in exile, some say in foreign lands, but even perhaps in some secret hiding place in Oceania itself. Goldstein is, in addition, at least publicly acknowledged as the author of the in-universe book The Theory and Practice of Oligarchical Collectivism, the book that explains how and why oceanic society is the way it is. Later on in Winston Smith's interrogation by O'Brien, the latter reveals that he partially wrote the book, thus further casting doubt on Goldstein's existence. Goldstein is described as having a lean Jewish face and wears a pair of spectacles, having a fuzzy aureole of grey hair and a face that resembles that of a sheep. Out of universe, it's very likely he is modelled after Lev Bronstein, better known as Leon Trotsky, a famous early leader of the Soviet Union and opponent of Joseph Stalin. Mr. Charrington first appears in part 1 of the book and is the elderly owner of a junk shop in a prole quarter of London. Charrington's first name is never revealed, though he claims to be a widower and the owner of the shop for the past 3 decades. He lives alone and had sold Winston his diary before the events of the novel. Charrington serves as a precious link to the past for Winston. By the very nature of his work as an antique seller, he symbolises the past, but also sells Winston his cherished coral paperweight and shares with him bits of old rhyme that recall the old world before the revolution and the abolishment of the past. It's also Mr. Charrington who rents a room over his shop to Winston, in which the latter and Julia carry on their secret affair. In truth, however, Charrington is later dramatically revealed as very probably an agent of the Thought Police, having spied on Winston the entire time and entrapped him. He is cleverly disguised with small alterations to his face, making a complete transformation of his appearance that fools Winston and even the arguably more cautious Julia. Instead of the white-haired, feeble old man he always appeared to be, he is revealed to Winston as being a dark-haired and alert man of around 35, and almost certainly an agent of the Thought Police. Charrington serves as a frightening example of the reach, cleverness, and power of the Thought Police. Tom Parsons is an anxious and somewhat unlikable neighbour, acquaintance and work colleague of Winston Smith. At 35, he was a chubby, if active and enthusiastic party member, though not intelligent or given any great responsibility. He was a member of committees dedicated to organising demonstrations and sports events, and is outwardly a loyal and good thinkful party comrade. One thing that stands out with Parsons is his near inexhaustible capacity for sweating, which seems indicative of his anxious nature. On the surface, Parsons seems to be a good contrast to Winston, a superficially unthinking drudge of the party, who Winston is sure will never be vaporised. Parsons shares his home with an unnamed wife and 2 children. Despite his conviction about Parsons, Winston is shocked when Parsons too appears in the Ministry of Love. His crime was saying "down with Big Brother" in his sleep, an outburst that was overheard by his own daughter and reported to the patrol the next morning. Parsons seeks reassurance from Winston that the party would not shoot him and hopes instead to continue serving in a forced labour camp instead. Parsons is last seen by Winston after liberally using the only toilet in the cell they shared. His ultimate fate is not certain. Syme is another acquaintance of Winston Smith and, unlike Parsons, is closer to being a friend as much as party members could have friends. Winston, for his part, enjoys his society more than that of Parsons, and had a genuine interest in Syme when he can get him to talk about his work. Syme is a newspeak expert and continually works on updating the language, relishing in abolishing words from the English language that he and the party deems unnecessary. Syme is completely loyal to the party and orthodox intellectually, though Winston feels certain he will be vaporised by the party, given his forthright manner and clear thinking. Syme is deemed too smart for his own good, easily grasping the true purpose of newspeak, to narrow the range of thought and thus increase party control. Since the party does not like such intelligent and frank individuals, Winston predicts Syme will be vaporised, and he is proved right. Syme does eventually disappear, and his fate is ultimately unknown. Mrs. Parsons is technically a named character, though only as the wife of Tom Parsons. She is also Winston's neighbour in Victory Mansions, and suffers a dreary and terrifying existence as the mother of two unruly children, who are also full members of the Spies, a youth group of the party that trains kids to monitor and report on their parents about any heretical thought when suspected. Mrs. Parsons is seen during an early scene in which she asks Winston to unblock a sink. Her own hard and crushing existence are manifested in her own worn and haggard appearance. Though only a woman of about 30, she already seems far older, Winston noting she had dust in the creases of her face. Winston predicts that she, and not her husband, would eventually be vaporized. However, he is incorrect. In fact, her and Tom's daughter denounces Parsons, leading to Mrs. Parsons' husband being taken away to the Ministry of Love. Unfortunately, in all likelihood, it is eventually probable that one of her kids will eventually denounce her too, though her fate is unknown. Jones, Aaronson and Rutherford are three minor characters who are dead by the events of the novel, and were former dissidents of the party who were purged in around 1965. Not much is known about them, with some information provided about Rutherford, who most impressed Winston. Rutherford was a large man with a grey mane of hair, who Winston guesses must have been immensely strong when healthier. Rutherford had been a cartoonist and caricaturist during the earlier days of the rise of the party, but along with his colleagues Jones and Aaronson, had fallen out of favour. Winston recalls encountering the trio sat in the Chestnut Tree Cafe after stays in the Ministry of Love. A faint air of the old revolutionary era clung to them, and Winston ominously noted that Jones and Rutherford had broken noses. These men are significant to Winston, given they were examples of a solid tie to the past, which had been unaltered by the party. Though their arrests, trials and confessions had been publicised, Winston had encountered a photograph of the three, which proved they were present at a party function in New York at the exact date that they were supposedly in Eurasia, betraying their country. Their significance to Winston endures right into his own interrogation, where O'Brien eventually convinces Winston, through torture and mental conditioning, that their innocence was merely a legend that he created. It's also confirmed by O'Brien that the three were similarly broken down into good, thinkful, rehabilitated party members, who all loved Big Brother. Katharine Smith is Winston's estranged wife. She never actually appears in the events of the novel directly, but is recalled and discussed by Winston and Julia. Katharine was a tall, fair-haired woman with a noble-like face, but as far as Winston could see, she was his mirror image in her genuine devotion to the party and Big Brother. A completely orthodox, good thinker, Winston named her the human soundtrack, he being entirely convinced there was nothing inside her head but slogans and ideas planted by the party. The two had been paired, their marriage approved by a special committee, and spent around 15 months together. Though repulsed by sex with her husband, Katharine submitted to intercourse as the couple's duty to the party. As Winston was eventually disgusted by the whole thing after a time, Katharine insisted they persevere to conceive a child. By 1984, the couple had been separated for years. Winston also recalls with Julia how one time he and his wife had been lost from a group of hikers, and he had seriously contemplated pushing Katharine off of a cliff, though he did not do so. Divorce is not permitted, and so the two are merely separated. Later on in his interrogation, Winston was forced ironically to confess to her murder, though it's unclear if Katharine is dead by this point. Ampleforth is a fellow party member and colleague of Winston's, who also works in the records department of the Ministry of Truth. His job is to rewrite politically or ideologically offensive poems from Oldspeak. He is larger than Winston and distinguished by his hairy ears. He is a gentle kind of man, similar in disposition to Parsons. He is somewhat attached to Winston in his own way, to the point that Winston believes Ampleforth would sit at his table if he spotted Winston alone. Ampleforth, like Winston, Syme, Parsons and others, also falls afoul of the party. despite his mild nature and seeming orthodoxy. Though not certain, Ampleforth suspects he was arrested because he left the word God in a poem by Kipling. This as he could not find any other rhyme with rod to replace it. Ampleforth briefly shares a cell with Winston and is thought by Winston to possibly bear the razor blade given to him by the Brotherhood. However, this is not so. Ampleforth is eventually ordered to room 101, but the details of his exact fate are unknown. Comrade Ogilvy is a non-existent man created by Winston Smith as part of his job. Ogilvy is created to account for an article formerly commending an unperson, Comrade Withers. Since Withers officially no longer exists, the article is rewritten to celebrate Ogilvy instead. Ogilvy replaces Withers in Big Brother's Order of the Day, with Winston inventing an entire backstory for the man. A good and loyal party member, Ogilvy had perished when, while flying over the Indian Ocean, he had leapt from his aircraft with important dispatches, weighing himself down with his machine gun so as to avoid capture by the enemy. Winston rewrites the offending article to have Big Brother commending the man and satisfactorily thinks that now Ogilvy exists in records as authentically as Charlemagne or Julius Caesar. Bumstead is an outer party member briefly seen in a scene in early part 3 of the novel. He is a timid, chinless man with pouched cheeks that Winston imagines could hide little stores of food. For such a minor character, we do know that his name and number are 2713 Bumstead J, as this is roared at him from the telescreen in the cell that he, Winston and others are held in, when he offers a grimy piece of bread to a starving, skull-faced man whom he evidently pities. Bumstead is brutally punished for his pity when a large guard enters the cell and bashes his face, which causes his face to swell horribly and a dental plate to fall out. When the guards finally come for the skull-faced man, it is Bumstead that the man initially suggests the guards take to room 101 instead of him. Bumstead's fate is unknown, though his transgression with the bread likely provoked a cruel period in the Fort Police's hands, followed by his own stay in room 101. Martin appears in part 2 as the named servant of O'Brien in his home. He is a small dark-haired man with an expressionless, diamond-shaped face that Winston thinks might be Chinese. Martin never speaks during Winston's time in O'Brien's home, but does play along with events as directed by his master. Martin may be one of 2 or 3 servants particularly tied to O'Brien, as Goldstein's book, which is true as description, states that every inner party member has 2 or 3 white-jacketed servants assigned to them. Martin shows no interest or comradeship with either Winston or Julia, and appears to be just passively participating in O'Brien's deception. When he leaves, he clinically studies their faces at the order of O'Brien, and then leaves without hint of liking either of them. Even when referred to as one of us and asked to sit as an equal, Martin still has a servant-like air about him, as if merely enjoying a privilege. Winston puts this all down to Martin perhaps being a Brotherhood member who had to change his appearance surgically to escape the party. However, this is unlikely given subsequent events. Comrade Tillotson is a colleague of Winston's who has a similar job to him in the records department. He too likely amends public records to accord with the party truth, but has a secretive air about him. He always pulls his speakwrite close to him, as if trying to keep what he is saying a secret between him and it. He occasionally darts hostile glances at Winston from his workstation. Tillotson also seems to be a rival of sorts, at least from Winston's perspective, as Winston imagines that Tillotson is working on the same thing as him at one point, and that it would be his version of events that would be selected over Tillotson's. Wilshire is another co-worker of Winston. He appears very briefly. His only significance to events is when he unwittingly delays Winston's first hurried conversation with Julia after she had given the note to him some days before. Winston barely knows Wilshire, who is a young, blonde-haired and silly-faced man who happens to invite Winston to sit with him as he appears to be looking for a spot from Wilshire's point of view. For a brief time, Wilshire is hated by Winston, who imagines driving a pickaxe into his smiling face. Withers is an unperson and former prominent member of the Inner Party and one of few named individuals belonging to the group. He had headed a group called FFCC that had provided cigarettes and other comforts to the sailors of the floating fortresses, but had somehow fallen out of favour with the party and been vaporised. He had been the subject of Big Brother's Order of the Day and been awarded the Order of Conspicuous Merit, second class. Withers may have been vaporised for heresy, corruption or incompetence, or simply because of his popularity. He is eventually replaced by Winston with the invented person of Comrade Ogilvy. And that's the end of the named characters. However, if you've stuck around this long, you deserve to hear the unnamed honourable mentions that are not time-stamped. There are 3 of these, and they are the prole washerwoman. She is a large, red-armed prole woman who frequently hangs clothes and diapers on a washing line below Winston and Julia's secret room. She appears to be middle-aged at least, likely a grandmother and mother, who perhaps washes and hangs clothes as a trade, given the seemingly endless amount of washing she has. Winston grows to admire this particular prole woman as a symbol of his fondly held hope that if the party can be overthrown, it's through the proles. She continually sings an artificially created song, "It Was Only an Hopeless Fancy," which Winston feels is symptomatic of how the proles lack a mind. However, he hopes one day that proles like her breed a generation of men and women capable of overthrowing the party. When Winston and Julia are taken at the end of Part 2, a scream is heard from her vicinity and the washing tub is heard to clang noisily. Since black uniformed guards do swarm in from the window too, it's likely she was manhandled out of the area and possibly injured, though nothing more is known about her fate. Our second unnamed character is an old man Winston briefly befriends in a prole pub. Winston notes while in a prole district that this man is at least 80 and would have clear memories and thoughts on the world before the revolution. Winston hopes to glean some details from the man, if the world had been better or worse back in his youth, but finds only a rubbish heap of details. The man only remembers things in anecdotes about his own life and can provide no great insights in the way that Winston wants. This encounter is important as it leads Winston to risking another encounter with Charrington, which moves him in the direction of ultimate capture. Finally, and perhaps rather anticlimactically, is the so-called waxen-faced or cold-faced officer. This is a minor unnamed character encountered by Winston in his time in the Ministry of Love. He is basically the commander of the guards and presumably charged with keeping order in the cells. This young officer orders the bashing of Bumstead, as well as the consigning of the skull-faced man to room 101. The officer also made enough of an impression to be present in Winston's own demented dreams of the period, and accompanies O'Brien into the cell with his guards when confronting Winston just prior to his sentencing to room 101. So there we are, all the named characters of 1984, and for those brothers and sisters who stuck it out to near the end, 3 bonus unnamed characters. Can you think of any others? If so, write about it in the comments. For now, farewell comrades, and if you like this content, consider liking and subscribing so as not to confine 1984 lore to the YouTube memory hole. Thank you, and remember, Big Brother is watching you.